Mac attack. Indeed, film star Macaulay Culkin delivers his much-anticipated testimony, telling jurors what actually happened when he was home alone with the King of Pop. Hello, I'm James Curtis. Welcome to E's coverage of the Michael Jackson trial. Checking on his cell phone, the 24-year-old Culkin appeared relaxed as he walked through the courthouse security, ready for his role, a significant one, in this high-stakes legal drama. And not far behind the young actor was his longtime pal, Michael Jackson, flanked by both his parents and his bodyguards. Once inside the Santa Maria courthouse, Macaulay Culkin braced himself for what was a grueling courtroom close-up. Under questioning by defense attorney Tom Mesereau, here's what he told the jury according to the courtroom transcripts.
Do you know the fellow seated at counsel table to my right?
Yes, I do.
Who is that?
It's Michael Jackson.
Is he a friend of yours?
Yes, he is.
How long has he been a friend of yours?
I first met him when I was 9 or 10 years old.
And how did you meet him?
He kind of called me out of the blue one time, just said, "Hey, you know, this is Michael Jackson." And this is after the Home Alone movie had come out. So it's kind of like it was like, I think I understand what's going to happen, and I'd just like to get together and talk.
And he is still your friend?
Yes, he is.
When did you last talk to him?
I talked to him about 3 days ago.
How many times do you think you visited Neverland?
More than a dozen times, from basically when I was about 10 to when I was about 14 years old. And I kind of took a break there for a while and just didn't go. I just never found myself on the West Coast, so I never found myself going there. And then went a couple times between when I was 17 and now, and just a handful of times.
And when was the last time, do you think, you visited Neverland?
About a year or so ago.
Okay, and you maintained a friendship with Mr. Jackson all those years?
Yes, I have.
Okay, do you consider him a close friend of yours?
Yes.
Next, Tom Mesereau gets right to the heart of the matter.
You're aware of the allegations in this case, correct?
Uh-huh, yes.
You heard about some of the allegations about whether or not Mr. Jackson improperly ever touched you, right?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson ever molest you?
Never.
Did Mr. Jackson ever improperly touch you?
Absolutely not.
Has Mr. Jackson ever touched you in any sexual type of way?
No.
Has he ever touched you in any offensive way?
No.
What do you think of these allegations?
I think that they're absolutely ridiculous.
When did you first learn that these prosecutors were claiming that you were improperly touched?
When did I first learn that?
Yes.
Somebody called me up and said, "You should probably check out CNN because they're saying something about you."
And did you check it out?
Yes, I did.
And what did you learn?
I learned that it was a former cook had done something to me, and there was something about a maid or something like that. It was just one of those things where I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that, first of all, these people were saying these things, or let alone that it was out there and people were thinking that kind of thing about me. And at the same time, it was amazing to me that nobody approached me and even asked me whether or not these allegations were true. They kind of just threw it out there, just like they didn't even double check it, basically. I mean, even if they assumed that they knew the answer, what got me was they didn't even ask.
Now, are you saying these prosecutors never tried to reach you to ask you your position on this?
No, they didn't.
Sean, Ricky, that sounds pretty damning toward the prosecution team.
It's very damning to the prosecution team, and it fits right into the defense theory, which is that Tom Sneddon and the prosecution team decided early on that Michael Jackson was guilty, and they never listened to anything that was contrary to that idea.
Well, at some point, Macaulay Culkin says that he had put it out there through his handlers that he was not going to give an interview to either side. But there had to have been some interval between the time this hit the airwaves and when that happened. And I do think that it's one of the things that I've said way back in the prosecution's case, that there is a shameful quality to saying that people were molested who deny that they were molested. And the prosecution, even with the ability to put in all this 1108 evidence, all the prior bad acts, did not have to shame other people.
And that really is one of the things that may spill over and backfire on this prosecution team, if anything will, and that is the idea that we have in their entirety, 6 alleged molestation victims. The one main victim, young Gavin, and the 5 prior individuals. Right now, it's essentially a tie. 3 of the individuals, 3 of the 6 are saying nothing happened. 2 of the 6 have said something happened. The main accuser, Gavin, and the one prior alleged victim that testified for the prosecution rather. And then there's one who won't even come to court.
Right.
How does that work out?
Yeah, but he got $20 million.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, there's
But who does
really...
that favor, though? I mean, does that favor one side or the other? Is it a baseball analogy of tie goes to the runner, defense
I don't know.
wins?
Well, I have to say, whenever it comes down to this kind of analysis that you do, I think the defense wins just because the prosecution has the burden of proof.
Yeah.
We can't forget that.
Yeah, and that's huge, and it reigns huge, looms large in all criminal prosecutions. As testimony continues, was it all just innocent fun? Defense attorney Tom Mesereau questions the movie star about Playtime at Neverland.
Have you been to the arcade with Michael Jackson?
Yeah.
Do you recall playing any games with Michael Jackson in the arcade?
Yeah, sure.
And do you recall this going on any time of day?
Playing video games?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What time of day would you play video games with Mr. Jackson?
Anytime. Sometimes I fell asleep in the arcade and I'd wake up and just start playing. It was one of those kind of things where, you'd be up half the night. You'd be kind of in and out of all these places. So it was never really any kind of specific time that we spent there, but it was, kind of just, we were always kind of just either there or at the theater or just driving around the golf carts or something like that.
Did you ever have any reason to think your family was being excluded by Mr. Jackson from anything you did at Neverland?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Did you ever get the feeling that your family was being excluded from anything you did at Neverland?
Absolutely not.
Next, jet setting with the King of Pop.
Okay. Have you ever traveled with Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Where'd you travel to?
We took a trip. I was going with some family friends. We were going to Bermuda, and I said, we're going. And he said, is it all right if I tag along? And I said, yes. So we did that. After that, we ended up we decided to fly back to Orlando because the family friends that I was traveling with, that's where they're from. So we went there, went to Disney World for a day or two, and ended up flying back with my family. And he was doing a charity event a couple years back in Washington, D.C., and so I hitched a ride with him on his plane back to New York.
And did Mr. Jackson ever do anything improper to you on any of these trips?
No.
Ever see him do anything that you found disturbing on any of these trips?
Absolutely not.
Has Mr. Jackson ever hugged you?
Sure.
Have you ever hugged him?
Absolutely.
Were you ever suspicious of any of these hugs as being something sexual in nature?
No, it was always very casual. It was just the way I hug any of my friends.
Sean Chapman-Holly, this has to be a bit of a double-edged sword for the defense team insofar as that the prosecution will simply say, no doubt, look, Macaulay Culkin likes Michael Jackson. They are friends. Of course, he will say nothing to harm him.
I suppose, really, Macaulay Culkin's testimony, its substance is no different from the testimony of Wade Robson and Brett Barnes. Yeah. They all say the same thing. Yes, we were friends. We were affectionate as friends. We played kid games together. Never did anything sexually inappropriate happen. I guess we're paying more attention to Macaulay Culkin because he's Macaulay Culkin, but he really says the same thing that these other guys said.
What about that, Ricky?
Well, I think that's true. I think that the difficulty for both sides of this case, which has to do, of course, with what you were talking about before, the burden of proof, it is a draw when you have some who say he did it to me, some who say he didn't, and so in the scheme of things, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the defense should win. However, I'll tell you what the prosecution's ace in the hole is here. I firmly believe at this stage that Michael Jackson is going to testify, and at that point, all of this win, lose, or draw goes right out the window, and the only thing that jury's going to think about is whether or not they believe Michael Jackson.
And you know what? Following up on your question, they're friends with him, so he'd say anything. If he molested them, he wouldn't be friends with them. They wouldn't be friends with him.
Yeah,
would they?
That's a good argument, but no kid, arguably, wants to admit that they were molested. That's
Correct.
also one
of the prosecution's. But they're not going to be friends with him, I don't think.
Well, there's often that kind of attraction.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as we continue. Coming up, just how many times did Macaulay Culkin sleep with Michael Jackson, and where'd that happen? Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. Film star Macaulay Culkin says that Jackson never touched him inappropriately as a child, but the prosecution has another point of view, of course. On cross-examination, Assistant District Attorney Ron Zonin grills the former child star about those sleeping arrangements at Neverland. Here's how the jury heard it according to the courtroom transcripts.
How often did you go to Neverland between the ages of 10 and 14?
How many times did I go there?
Yes.
A dozen times, maybe more.
All those occasions. Did you sleep in his room?
At some point or another, I think I might have ended up sleeping in his room. But I couldn't really say that I slept there every single time I was there or anything like that.
Would it be safe to say that 90% of the time you stayed there?
In his bedroom?
Yes.
I don't think it would be 90%. It would be...
80%?
It would be I slept in his room about as often as I fell asleep anywhere. Like, I fell asleep. I would flop down. We'd fall asleep in the movie theaters. He has beds in the movie theater. I'd flop down and fall asleep there. I've fallen asleep in the video game machines before. I mean, I would go and play there basically until I just run myself out. And I'd just flop down wherever I needed to.
And you'd be pretty exhausted and go fast asleep. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that would happen. I'd wear myself out and fall asleep just like any kid would.
So your question about, the question that you answered about Mr. Jackson never molesting you, your answer more accurately is he never did while you were awake. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that?
Well, your answer to Mr. Mesereau's question about he never molested you.
Yes.
Your answer more accurately is he never molested you, to your knowledge, while you were awake. Is that true?
As far as I know, he's never molested me.
While you were asleep as a 9-year-old kid who would run himself ragged, you wouldn't know what happened while you were asleep, right?
I find that unlikely.
Well, but you just told us that sometimes you'd be so exhausted after a day of playing, you'd fall asleep on a machine.
Yeah, but I think I'd realize if something like that was happening to me.
All right, we're back to the sleep theory of molestation. Zonin doesn't give up, though. Next, he questions Macaulay Culkin about when he stopped bunking with Michael Jackson.
And you think when you first started coming to Neverland, you were 9 years old. That would have been 1989.
About 9 or 10 years old. So it's probably like 90, 91, it was after the Home Alone movie came out.
How old were you when you stopped sleeping in bed with Michael Jackson?
Well, like I said, I stopped going there just because I had never really found myself going to Los Angeles or anything like that. So I didn't really come back again until I was about 17.
The question was, when did you stop sleeping?
I know. I'm getting there. And so when I started coming back again, I found myself just not sleeping in bed. And I've always kind of fell asleep in the guest units ever since then.
Why didn't you stay with Mr. Jackson in his room?
Because I enjoyed my privacy a little bit more.
All right, we'll get to that last line of question. Now, let's just do it now. A little surly on the part of Macaulay Culkin or appropriately feisty?
Well, I think he's annoyed with this prosecution for, as he said earlier, not even coming to him and asking him, did this happen before they put it out there in the world that he was molested by Michael Jackson?
And what happens as a result of this, though, of this little tension between the two, is the prosecution gets to put forth two theories of their case. Number one, masturbating while sleeping. That's really what Starr, the brother of Gavin, says he saw. Okay. So that's why it ties in, that if Starr says Michael Jackson did this to my brother, then now we're looking about the other boy's possibility. And the other theme of the prosecution is Michael Jackson tires of boys after about the age of 12 or 13.
Although one of the last or latest alleged molestation victims from the past testified to sleeping with Michael Jackson when he was into his late teens.
Or something like that, yeah.
And one of the things that we really should look at is that although Macaulay Culkin put out there that he says that he was not contacted, the prosecution has put out there that they did, in fact, try to contact him, and he was not going to talk to them.
And we're going to kick that around. Can a prosecutor's office force someone to talk to them? Can they talk to someone even though they, as Ricky says, put it out there that they don't want to? On another note, how many kids go from school buses to limos overnight? On redirect examination by Tom Mesereau, Macaulay Culkin tells the jury why he shares that special bond with the King of Pop.
You said that Michael Jackson understood you. What did you mean?
Well, because of circumstances like with my career, I mean, one day I was essentially a normal kid who happened to be an actor. And the next thing I know, I'm just this thing where people are hiding in the bushes and trying to take your picture. And just, people are kind of out to profit from you. Or next thing you know, you have a million acquaintances and no more friends anymore. It was like that. And he understood that. That was one of the first things we talked about was I get it. I understand what you're going through. I understand the same thing. You know, if you want to talk about anything or if you ever want to, I could learn from his knowledge, basically, of where he came from. And you couldn't really find a whole lot of people, especially when you're 9 years old, put it in these circumstances that nobody else. You can't really talk to anybody about this kind of stuff, and he understood it. And it was a comforting thing.
Sounds legit to me. As the testimony continues, Macaulay Culkin describes Michael Jackson's kid-like nature.
Did you ever see Mr. Jackson as very childlike himself?
He was very childlike, yes.
What do you mean?
He liked doing the things that we like to do. He liked playing the arcade games, though he wasn't as good as us usually, but, he still enjoyed doing it because, it's one of those things. And he enjoyed the same kind of movies. He liked running around. We used to play tag. I mean, it's that kind of thing. He played with us, the same kind of way I played with any of my friends my age.
Did Mr. Jackson and you ever discuss the problem of sort of missing out on your childhoods because of all the work and pressures of success?
It was one of those things that we talked about, yeah. It kind of just comes with the territory. Like I said, it's not really, it's not really a therapy kind of thing. It's just kind of more like occasionally we would just kind of talk about those kind of things, yes.
Ricky Kleeman, I want to pick up on one of the issues we talked about briefly. That is the assertion of Macaulay Culkin on his direct examination that they never even tried to contact me, they never double-checked, but on cross it clearly comes out that several efforts were made and were rebuffed by Culkin.
Well, the prosecution would have to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not go out and try to talk to them.
But can they do it? Is there a mechanism the prosecutors can use to say, come and talk to us and actually make it happen as opposed to try?
No, they can't make it happen.
But we know as lawyers, one of the things that you have to do is follow up, send confirming letters so that later on, this is not an issue. You send a letter that says, I'm trying to reach you, and then you bring proof to court that says, here's the letter I sent to you,
in addition to that, when an attorney sends out a subpoena, that's a court order. They can order him into court and talk to him in court, can't they?
Yes, of course they can.
So what about that option?
But there's always that question of can you use a false subpoena, that is, bring them to the courthouse just to talk to them. You can't do that.
Well, it doesn't have to be a false subpoena, though. You subpoena him legitimately for this trial.
Well, for trial,
comes,
yes.
And you talk to him at least at that point.
And he has the right to say, I don't want to talk to you.
But that's a different story.
Yes.
That's a totally different story. You come to court, I try to talk to you and explain what I want to say, and you say no, then it puts the prosecution in an entirely different light. Still ahead. Macaulay Culkin comes clean about the nudie magazines that he used to stash under his bed while he was still a kid. Chuckle on, Ricky Kleeman. We continue. Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. Film star Macaulay Culkin testified that his pal, Michael Jackson, has always had a childlike nature. But Assistant District Attorney Ron Zonin wants to know how childlike are the adult materials seized at Neverland. Here's how it happened according to the courtroom transcripts.
You said he was childlike. Are you referring to his behavior back when you were 10 and 11 years old?
Yeah, I mean, even now, he's more of a father now. It's kind of fun for me to see that, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, he still has kid-like qualities.
Do you believe that his possession of a great deal of sexually explicit material is consistent with him being childlike?
How do you mean?
Him possessing a lot of magazines that are very sexually explicit.
It depends what you are talking about. I mean, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I had a couple Playboys under my bed.
How about magazines that depict men and women engaged in sex acts? Magazines with men and men engaged in sex acts?
What about them?
Magazines of women inserting things inside of them. Would you believe that possession of those kinds of magazines, and a number of them, would it be consistent with or inconsistent with his being childlike?
Well, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having those things, whether you're childlike or not. I mean, overall, he's still a human being, and it's something that human beings possess. And so I don't really necessarily find that inappropriate. But yeah, I don't find it inappropriate.
But it's surprising to you that he would be in possession of all that. Is that right?
Not necessarily, no.
Again, at least for me, and I don't know if it's going this way for the jury, it's a big who cares about what other witnesses think, alleged victims or not, about Michael Jackson's possession of these materials.
It's totally irrelevant under any rule of law. It's their opinion about what childlike means. I mean, that's irrelevant. The one thing I'll say in the prosecution's favor here is they know what train they're on, to use Howard Weitzman's language, and they know what they want to keep putting out there, and they do it, especially Mr. Zonin, very well.
What's interesting, though, is we continue to hear about Michael's childlike behavior in all of these other respects, playing tag and the water fights and all of this stuff. I mean, I wonder, I don't know, I'm not an expert on pedophiles, but it's probably not classic pedophile behavior to behave like a child in all other aspects of your life.
Yeah, it's interesting. Are we going to see an expert that's going to talk about the idea of molestations happening when kids are asleep?
Well, I don't know if we're going to see an expert, but we certainly have heard from Starr about it. I don't know. It's actually a very interesting idea,
because
James. There's always rebuttal.
I've tried a lot of these types of cases, never heard of it before. Watch our coverage. It continues. Michael Jackson trial tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Where? Right here on E. See ya.